History is full of iconic moments we all know by heart. Or did they? History is a story. It's a grand, sprawling narrative we tell ourselves about who we are and where we came from. But like any story passed down through generations, details get, well, fuzzy. They get embellished, simplified, or completely rewritten to make for a better tale. What if I told you that some of the most iconic moments in our collective memory, the ones you see in movies and read about in textbooks, are built on a foundation of pure fiction? These aren't just minor misrememberings. Let's start with a classic image, the Viking. Big, burly, bearded, and sporting a magnificent helmet with two giant horns. You've seen it everywhere, from cartoons to football team mascots. But here's the thing, it never happened. Archaeologists have excavated countless Viking graves, settlements, and battle sites, and they have found zero evidence of Vikings wearing horned helmets in battle. Can you imagine how impractical that would be? A single axe swing from the side, and your fancy headgear becomes a neck-snapping liability. So where did this iconic yet completely false image come from? You can thank the 19th century, specifically the world of opera. In the 1870s, costume designer Carl Emil Doppler created horned helmets for a production of Richard Wagner's epic opera cycle. The dramatic, intimidating look was a smash hit with audiences, and the image just stuck. Speaking of historical figures being defined by a single inaccurate physical trait, let's talk about Napoleon Bonaparte. But Napoleon wasn't actually short. He was measured at death as 5 feet 2 inches in French units. This translates to roughly 5 feet 7 inches in modern units. The myth of Little Boney was a masterpiece of wartime propaganda, expertly crafted by his British enemies. Let's jump across the Atlantic to the birth of the United States, a period ripe with myth-making. Perhaps the most enduring story is that of young George Washington trying out his new hatchet, chopping down his father's prized cherry tree. When confronted, he bravely declared, "I cannot tell a lie," and confessed his deed. It's also completely made up. The story first appeared in a biography written by itinerant preacher and bookseller Mason Locke Weems, published in 1800. So he invented the cherry tree story for the 5th edition of his book, and it was an instant success. Now let's saddle up for another famous revolutionary ride. The British are coming. The image of Paul Revere galloping through moonlit Massachusetts countryside is etched into American consciousness. But the real story is more complex and collaborative. First, Revere wasn't alone. He was part of a sophisticated alarm system. He was one of dozens of riders sent out that night. Furthermore, Revere never yelled, "The British are coming!" That would have been confusing. Why? Because most colonists still considered themselves British. Shouting that would be like running through a modern American town yelling, "The Americans are here." The mission was secret, to warn Samuel Adams and John Hancock. His actual whispered warning was likely, "The regulars are coming out." Let's travel back even further to the grandeur and excess of ancient Rome. We've all heard the stories of lavish Roman banquets where gluttonous aristocrats would feast for hours, then retire to a special room called a vomitorium to purge themselves. The only problem is, it's completely false. Vomitoriums were real, but they had nothing to do with throwing up. The word comes from the Latin verb vomere, meaning to spew forth. In an architectural context, it referred to large passageways and amphitheaters, designed to spew forth massive crowds of people quickly and efficiently into and out of the arena. From Rome, let's sail to the legendary city of Troy. The story of the Trojan War climax is the Trojan horse. After a 10-year siege, clever Greeks build a giant wooden horse, hide soldiers inside, leave it as a supposed offering. But did it really happen? Most modern historians and archaeologists are highly skeptical. The story first appears in Homer's Odyssey, composed hundreds of years after the supposed event. A more plausible theory is that the horse was a metaphor. The horse was sacred to sea god Poseidon, who was also god of earthquakes. It's possible Troy's walls were brought down by an earthquake. Or perhaps the horse was a type of siege engine that simply looked a bit like an animal. Alright, let's move from ancient warfare to the world of science. Picture Isaac Newton sitting thoughtfully under an apple tree. Out of nowhere, an apple detaches and bonks him right on the head. In a flash of inspiration, he understands universal gravitation. It's a simple, elegant story of sudden genius, right? Newton himself did tell the apple story, but in his version he simply observed an apple fall while contemplative. The sight made him wonder, why straight down? Why not sideways or upwards? This led him to ponder if the force pulling the apple might be the same holding the moon in orbit. It wasn't sudden discovery, but the starting point for years of mathematical work. The apple was the spark, not the entire bonfire of discovery. Next up, let's talk about Thomas Edison, the guy everyone says single-handedly invented the light bulb, or did he? While Edison was brilliant, he didn't invent the light bulb from scratch. The concept had been around for decades, and dozens of other inventors had already created working but impractical incandescent lamps. Edison's genius was making the first commercially viable one, testing thousands of materials with his large team. And what about Einstein, so brilliant he must have struggled with basic subjects? There's this persistent myth that Einstein failed math as a schoolboy. It's completely untrue. Einstein was a mathematical prodigy. He once said, "I never failed in mathematics. Before I was 15 I had mastered differential and integral calculus." The myth likely started because of differences in German and Swiss school grading systems where 6 was the highest grade versus 1 being top mark. Let's rewind to the Middle Ages, often unfairly labeled the Dark Ages. One pervasive myth is that nearly everyone believed the Earth was flat. The story goes that Columbus was a lone visionary, bravely sailing against ignorance, risking falling off the world's edge. It's compelling and almost entirely wrong. Virtually every educated person in medieval Europe knew the Earth was a sphere. This knowledge was preserved in monasteries and universities. The ancient Greeks had deduced Earth's spherical shape. Eratosthenes had calculated its circumference with remarkable accuracy. This knowledge was common sense for anyone educated during Columbus's time, so if the debate wasn't about Earth's shape, what was Columbus's big argument about? It was about the Earth's size. Columbus believed the Earth was much smaller than it actually is. His critics weren't afraid he'd sail off the edge, they feared he would starve on a voyage far longer than anticipated. In wonderful irony, Columbus's critics had the science right. Let's turn to urban disaster, the Great Chicago Fire of 1871. The legend is simple. Catherine O'Leary's cow kicked over a lantern, igniting a blaze that consumed the city. But the cow is innocent. The fire did start near the O'Leary barn, but there's no reliable evidence a clumsy bovine was the culprit. The story was likely invented by journalist Michael Ahern, who later admitted he and reporters fabricated the tale for more colorful copy. Consider another famous fire scapegoat. The story of Emperor Nero fiddling while Rome burned in 64 AD is one of history's most enduring images of callous leadership. This dramatic scene is pure fiction. First, the fiddle hadn't been invented, it wouldn't appear for another 1,000 years. If Nero played anything, it was the lyre. More importantly, contemporary accounts say Nero wasn't even in Rome when the fire started. He was at his villa in Antium. Upon hearing the news, he rushed back and organized relief efforts, opening his palaces to house the homeless. Let's journey to colonial America, to the infamous Salem witch trials of 1692. The popular image is mass hysteria where accused witches were burned at the stake, a fiery spectacle. But here's a surprising fact. Not a single person was burned at the stake in Salem. While the trials were tragic and deadly, the method dictated by English law was hanging. 19 people, 14 women and 5 men, were sent to the gallows. From witches to wives, let's look at England's most notorious king, Henry VIII. He is famous for being very large and having 6 wives. The jingle we learn, divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived, paints a picture of a monstrous tyrant who casually disposed of women. While his marital history was brutal, the simple rhyme glosses over complex political and religious reality. Henry's primary motivation wasn't malice, but desperate obsession with securing a male heir and continuing the Tudor dynasty. His first divorce from Catherine of Aragon was a seismic event taking years, ultimately leading him to break with the Roman Catholic Church and establish the Church of England. His subsequent marriages were intertwined with shifting political and religious factions at court. The executions of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, while undeniably cruel, were carried out after formal charges of treason. Adultery in a queen was considered treason. The rhyme is a great memory aid, but it reduces a world-changing dynastic and religious struggle to a simple story of a bad husband. So there you have it, 12 stories, 12 pieces of common knowledge that crumble under scrutiny. Vikings didn't have horned helmets, Napoleon wasn't short, Washington never chopped down that cherry tree. Paul Revere never shouted, "The British are coming." The Romans didn't have puke rooms. The Trojan horse was probably a metaphor. Newton's idea didn't come from concussion. Edison didn't invent the light bulb alone. Einstein aced math. Medieval folks knew Earth was round. Mrs. O'Leary's cow didn't start the Chicago fire. No witches were burned in Salem. It's a lot to take in. It feels like the historical rug has been pulled out from under us. But isn't that exciting? History is dynamic and ever-evolving. That's liberating. These myths didn't stick around because people are unintelligent. They persisted because they are good stories. They are simple, memorable, teach clear moral lessons. They provide convenient scapegoats. Our brains love narrative shortcuts. The real stories are almost always more interesting. The real story is always more illuminating. They are filled with nuance, collaboration, propaganda, serendipity. The real story of the light bulb, incremental innovation and industrial systems. The real story of Columbus, ambition, miscalculation, and geopolitical consequences. The real story of Salem, social anxieties, legal precedents, and personal rivalries. Peeling back myth doesn't diminish history, it enriches it. It reveals the intricate web of human motivations. So, which myth surprised you the most? The vomitorium being just an exit? Or the horned helmet being an operatic invention? History invites us to be detectives, ask questions, check sources, challenge the stories we've been told. The past is not a closed book, it's a vast, open landscape waiting for curious minds. Keep questioning, keep reading, never stop being amazed, and as always, thanks for reading.